Hello everyone, this is ex-Bethelite, and one thing about the structure of Bethel is that you have an overseer. Each department will have an overseer, and each department will also have an assistant overseer. So in the warehouse where I worked, we had an overseer, he had an assistant, and the assistant overseer does not have to be an elder. Doesn't have to be an elder. Now, as far as an overseer, does an overseer have to be an elder? That I'm not 100% sure of. But eventually, everybody was gone from the warehouse. Everyone was gone from my crew. We had my overseer's assistant. He left to get married. The next guy that had been there for quite some time, he also left, and that was one of the guys that we thought would get accepted as a couple. You had a couple other guys leave, more than likely because of having girlfriends, women, things like that. And then there was another guy that left. I think it's just because he didn't like it. He was only there because of family pressure. And that literally left my overseer and myself as people there having experience. Now, the warehouse is not as simple as loading and unloading trucks. The warehouse is where we keep all the food supplies for all the different kitchens. We send things out to Brooklyn. We send things out to Patterson. We keep all those things in the warehouse. So we're talking freezer item. The freezer was so big you could drive a forklift. And you had to drive a forklift in there in order to get all the items out of the freezer. You had different coolers with different temperatures for different items. You had multiple coolers. You had a room where we did slicing of meats. You had a room where we would box vegetables. These are different rooms for different purposes. And then you had the dry area, which is where you kept your canned goods. That area was huge. Then you had a whole nother building, which we called the root cellar, where you had some of your bag items, your rice, your flaxseed. Working in the warehouse was a little bit more complicated than you might think. Now, when all those people left, and it was just myself and the overseer there, as people having known anything about it, I was doing a lot of training. I was training people on how to do the work because everybody was new. There was someone there from the cheese processing, and the cheese processing is attached to the warehouse. However, he didn't know what was going on in detail in the warehouse. So now we have a situation. We have someone who has an issue with black people, such as myself. And he's in a situation where every department in Bethel has got to have an assistant. And the only person there, I think I may have told you guys this before, the only person there with any kind of experience was myself. When my overseer wasn't there, when my overseer would go to visit his family or what have you, it was just me. It was me to direct things, and then after things were done, to double check. and make sure all those things were done correctly. So it was pretty obvious. It was an obvious situation. I remember sitting down for lunch, and it would come up in discussion. Well, hey, I hear you guys are going to need a new assistant overseer because such and such left to get married. And then, the guy would say, experience goes a long way in that selection process, because you're the only one there that understands how everything works other than the overseer. And, I'm there, I'm correcting the things that guys are doing wrong. And there's one guy there that actually, he told me, he said, Marcus, I just want to talk to you. We both know that they're going to be looking for an assistant overseer to help run this place. And I just want you to know that it's going to be me. And I'm looking at him and I'm thinking, not that this was that big of a deal to me. It really wasn't that big of a deal to me. It wasn't something that I thought about on a regular basis. But just the fact that he was going to say something like that shows how big of a deal it was to everyone else. And this is one of the guys that was in my overseer's face all the time, doing what you would call brown nosing, just laughing at everything he would say. Now, not my overseer, but my department overseer also. And there was also another guy that came over from another department that wanted to be the assistant overseer. And he didn't know anything. He didn't know anything. Now, keep in mind, all these people are white. These are all white people. When the original guys that were on the crew left, there were black and there were also Hispanic. But once they were gone, the people that they brought in to replace them were all white. Now, there were some people that came over from Brooklyn to help out, but they were, and they were black, but they were just there to help out from Brooklyn. They were going back to Brooklyn after a certain period of time regardless. And they did everything in their power. I remember my overseer doing everything in his power to try to train these guys, to try to get them ready, so that he wouldn't have to make me his assistant. I'm getting something to drink here. This stuff here is awesome. The Everfresh. The Everfresh is my drink. So he was doing everything he could in his power to make sure that, he did everything he could to train other people. And you had guys that would try to just take charge. They would try to take charge. So we had watermelons that came in off the truck. And these watermelons were double stacked. So you had two bins of watermelons stacked on top of each other. And what they would do is they would take the pallet trucks, lift up the watermelon, and I would direct them as far as where to go with that, as far as all that's concerned. And what happened is you had somebody say, well, why don't we put them in this cooler? And I told him, I said, you're not going to be able to fit 2 rows of the watermelon. They went outside to do something. I don't know what they're doing. I might go and grab something else to drink while they're doing all that. You're not going to be able to fit 2 rows. We needed to be able to make the best use of the space that we had in the warehouse because we had all our regular shipments. that we had to also process in addition to the watermelon that were coming in. It wasn't just watermelon that we were going to be dealing with. So he tried it anyway. This guy tried it anyway. And what ended up happening was I'm going to put this one back.
Yes, sir.
What ended up happening is he tried to squeeze those watermelon in and knocked over a bin of watermelon. I had to put up with things like that because, believe it or not, people at Bethel aren't just doing it just for the love of Jehovah or what have you. They're interested in titles. They're interested in moving up. There are people that would almost fight. There's people that'll almost fight over these positions. And that's what happened to me on several occasions. Where you had guys that didn't understand what was going on, but they wanted to get loud. They wanted to try to take over. And what would happen is something would get messed up.
Yes, 94, sir.
Thank you.
1, 2, 3, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Have a good day, sir.
All right, you too.
Thank you.
What would happen is someone would mess something up, and then the overseer would come back and find out that, the guy that he wants to take over, because he sure enough didn't want it to be me, seeing as how he had such a big problem with black people and people of any other kind of ethnicity. Let me try to open up this drink here. Oh yeah, brisk half and half blueberry lemonade. It got to the point where these guys were constantly having to tell the overseer that they had knocked something over, spilled something, put something in the wrong cooler, put something in the wrong place in the truck, that a lot of these guys gave up. I'm telling you, they flat out gave up. They said, fine, you run it. You know what I mean? What they meant by that was, we're not going to try to challenge you as far as being an assistant overseer here in this department. They said, fine, you run it. Fine, okay. Then it got to the point where whenever the overseer wasn't there, they automatically just listened to me. And what ended up happening is they just delayed and getting an assistant overseer. They're supposed to have an assistant overseer. They just delayed and getting the assistant overseer. Now, why would they do that? Well, they were getting the same amount of work anyway. I was given the same amount of work. I was working just as hard as I would have worked had I been an assistant. So the department overseer just delayed. He just never really assigned anybody to be the assistant. And I was the assistant in basically the unofficial assistant. I was pretty much the unofficial assistant there because I didn't have the title, but I was doing the work. Now, it's interesting that, that they wouldn't do that because that's just how it works at Bethel. Ask anybody that works at Bethel. You have an overseer and you have an assistant. So why exactly my department just decided, hey, the only other guy here that knows what's going on is a black guy. So what are we going to do? We just won't have an assistant overseer. We just won't have one. And we actually had pagers. we had pagers, and the assistant overseer would normally have a pager, and the overseer would have a pager. So my overseer had a pager, and he gave me a pager just in case a truck would come in and they needed somebody to rush over to offload it. Well, they gave me a pager, so I had a pager. Just people in the general Bethel family knew I was the only other person there with experience. So if anyone wanted, had a question about something and they couldn't get a hold of the overseer, they would ask me. Literally, I was doing the job of the assistant overseer, and they didn't want to give me that title. Why do you think that is my question. Why do you think that is? Now, out of the guys that left because of wanting to get married and other things like that, the guy who seemed to not give too much of a care about Bethel or didn't even want to be there, and that's the guy that asked, how do you guys even know if there's a God or not? That guy. That's the guy that my overseer, and of course he was, white, and that's the guy that my overseer was bending over backward to try to train. He was trying to train him because he wanted him to be his assistant so bad. So, it's not a spiritual thing. It's not like, oh, well, Marcus is, we're going to look at him and, it's a spiritual thing, because you don't have to be an elder. I was a servant, and I was auxiliary pioneering even in my congregation at Bethel. At Bethel. It wasn't a lack of knowledge of the job. It wasn't spirituality, because I'm at Bethel and I'm auxiliary pioneering. What else would it be? You guys comment down below, you let me know what you think. What else could it have been? If it's not race, if race had nothing to do with it, what else could it have been? There's work knowledge, there's spirituality that they may look at. There's things like that. What else could it have been? This is my first time drinking this half and half iced tea blueberry lemonade, and this stuff is delicious. And really nice day out here for a walk. But you guys comment down below, let me know what you think. There was also a situation, not in my congregation at Bethel, because that congregation was primarily black congregation. But the congregation that I went to before going to Bethel, the watchtower conductor was, of course, white. A lot of the people in this hall were white. This was primarily a white congregation where, for the most part, a lot of people were related in that hall or knew each other really, really well. And the hall has changed now as far as the demographics, but at that point, the watchtower conductor would not call on anyone black. If you were black, there was like one elder who was black, and he was the only one that he would call on. And a lot of the black people in that congregation, they just wouldn't raise their hand. They just wouldn't raise their hand. There was one person that said, well, maybe he doesn't see me because of where I'm sitting. This sister moved to the front, and all you saw was her hand just up, waving in the air, and she wasn't getting called on. She sat in the front, like directly in front of him. You would hear him calling on his family over and over again. You'd hear him calling on just random people in the hall. But you would not hear him call on anybody that was black. And it got so bad. This got so bad where people were just, if you were black, you just didn't raise your hand and you just didn't give a comment during the Watchtower study. The only other exception that I remember was the service overseer. He was a service overseer, and he just so happened to be black. But that's how bad, the racism thing can get in the organization. And at the time, I was naive. I wasn't thinking racism was the issue. I'm thinking, well, maybe he just doesn't know somehow. Maybe he just doesn't know. So I remember going into the room where, there's the glass and people sit when they come in, they're late, they go back in this back room. Well, I asked to talk to him, went in that room, and I told him that there were a lot of people. I didn't mention that these were all black people because I'm thinking at the time, well, maybe it's a coincidence. I mentioned to him, there's a lot of people that have been trying to comment, and they've been trying to comment since I've been in this hall, and they haven't gotten any opportunity. And they think that maybe it's because you can't see them. And I told them that I would just mention it to you, just so you knew about it. And he gave me this, boy, you must be crazy. We don't call on them around here type looks. And it's ridiculous because you think, how did he get in that position? If this is Jehovah's Spirit-directed organization, how did he get in that position? I'm trying to put the top on this drink with one hand. The guy at Bethel, if that was Jehovah's Spirit-directed organization, how did he get in that position? There's none of this that imperfect. Racism is beyond imperfect. How did they get in that position if that is Jehovah's Spirit-directed organization, as in he is actively involved with it, unlike any other organization on earth? There's no evidence of it. And printing watchtowers in different languages isn't evidence because other religions can do the same thing. They don't pass out magazines, but they print literature in other languages, and they have churches all over. So there's no evidence, definitely not at Bethel or anywhere else, that and persecution, stop it. There's so many churches that have experienced persecution. Just because you experience persecution, you want to act like you're the only ones that experience it and persevere. There's been a number of people who are Christian and other religions that have experienced persecution. And so you guys let me know what you think about all this stuff. This is ex-Bethelite signing out.